We're here at Promontory Point, Utah. Hey, I'm Mark. See something a little different? No green screen, no clicker, no teleprompter. We're live on the scene. Oh, you're still here? I thought we left you at that rest stop in Burley. You know what? You're getting dumber every day. And right now, you're acting like it's next Thursday. Hey, I'm glad we're out here where the real learning can be done. I'm a history teacher gone rogue, and this is Field Trip to Promontory Point. All right, so what's the significance of Promontory Point? Thank you. This is where the first United States Transcontinental Railroad was completed. So rather than build out in one direction, say from east to west, Congress authorized the building of the Transcontinental Railroad by two companies. One, the Union Pacific, would begin building westward from Omaha, Nebraska. The other, the Central Pacific, would begin building out of Sacramento eastward. And the two companies were supposed to meet somewhere in Utah. So why Utah? There were actually three proposed routes to the Pacific Ocean presented to Congress before 1861. One proposal had the railroad starting in Minneapolis and traveling westward to the Oregon country. That route would require tough sledding through the northern Rockies, with very few passes to build through. This became the route of the Great Northern Railway in the 1890s. A southern proposal originated in New Orleans and went across the flatlands of Texas. That route then went south into what was still Mexican territory before turning northwest into California. Obviously, this route was supported by Southerners that saw the opportunity to build their economies. This became the route of the Southern Pacific Railroad in the 1880s. It was also the onus behind the Gadsden Purchase from Mexico that ultimately filled out what is today the lower 48 contiguous United States. Now, the middle route that was selected started in Omaha, went west across the Great Plains, through the Rockies at South Pass, across the Great Basin, then over the Sierra Nevada mountains into Sacramento. This is the proposal that won out when the Civil War started in 1861. In 1863, the Union Pacific began building from Omaha, Nebraska. They hired Civil War veterans that knew how to work in brigades and in companies. Civil War engineers skilled at grading out rights of way, building bridges across rivers, laying out track, and doing it efficiently. From Omaha, the UP made great progress on the flat or gradually rising Great Plains. The work of laying the track was done, though, by Irish, and in spite of the meager wages, the UP sometimes laid 10 miles of track per day. From Sacramento, the Central Pacific used Chinese laborers, Chinese that were used to digging in the mines of the Sierra Nevada. They were experts at pick and shovel and axe, and most importantly, explosives. It was the Chinese that were willing to face the danger of setting explosive that built the 15 tunnels that made their way through the Sierra Nevada mountains, to build the ledges dug into the sides of the sheer cliffs of the Sierra Nevada mountains. It was the Chinese, at some points, where they were literally suspended in baskets with picks and shovels and left there all day to work against those sheer cliffs of the Sierra Nevadas. In fact, the CP had introduced a new form of explosives, and in this case here, it was nitroglycerin. Much more explosive than dynamite, but much less stable. White people wouldn't touch it. The Chinese, even with their meager wages, were willing to use the nitroglycerin to blast the tunnels apart, moving through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Work was so slow in the Sierra Nevadas that where the Union Pacific was making at times 10 miles a day, the Central Pacific was only making merely inches. Frustration with the progress was offset a little bit by the subsidies that were granted to the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. For every mile of track that either company was able to lay on flat land, they were paid $16,000 a mile. It's not too bad. In the mountains, both companies were actually paid, though, 48,000 miles, and in the Intermountain region, they were paid 32,000 miles. So, how can we bilk the government out of this money that they have? Well, through some creative surveying and engineering, the Central Pacific Railroad actually picked up the mountains and moved them 10 miles out of Sacramento. The distance from Sacramento to the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas is actually 40 miles. So they began getting a $48,000 subsidy in an area where they were supposed to get a $16,000 subsidy. So all the subsidies over that 30 miles that they were supposed to be getting for flat land ended up making them $1 million extra dollars. The Union Pacific wasn't quite as, wasn't exactly honest about the whole thing either. They moved the base of the Rocky Mountains away from the middle of Wyoming out towards the boundary of Wyoming and Nebraska, and they started collecting that extra $48,000 subsidy at that point there. Bilking your government. It goes long, there's a long history of that. There's another subsidy that the two companies got. They got subsidies, they got the land on either side of the railroad that they were going to sell to individuals, homesteaders later on. Well, since they got all the land on either side of the railroad, rather than drive a straight line, they put these huge curves in the road in order to maximize the amount of land they could have within a period of time. So rather than making a straight line over 100 miles and getting the land on either side of it for sale, they put these curves in there so that they could actually have 130 or 140 miles of track over the 100 mile period. Moving west with the Union Pacific and east with the Central Pacific were private enterprises to meet the demands of workers of the lines, men that haven't seen society, or women, in months or maybe years. When construction slowed, entrepreneurs would throw up these temporary communities with gambling houses, saloons, dance halls, brothels, everything a worker could need. These communities were referred to as hell on wheels. Eventually, the two sides met. And then they passed each other, going in opposite directions, grading out the land. The Central Pacific come in this direction, the Union Pacific come in this direction. And you know what? As they worked, they continued to gain those subsidies that Congress was paying to them. $32,000 a mile going that direction, $32,000 a mile going that direction. There was even some friendly competition between the Chinese and the Irish. When the Irish came across a company of Chinese, they would set their explosives and blow all kinds of dirt and rocks over the Chinese over on this side of the track. On this side of the track, the Chinese would get their retribution. They would set their explosives and they would blow all kinds of dirt and rock over on the Irish on this side. And still, at the same time, collecting their $32,000 per mile. Ultimately, Congress got together and said, you have to come and get together at some point. And that's what they did. They got together, they decided the place to be would be Promontory Point, where we're at today. Congress determined that the two sides would meet here at Promontory Point, Utah. On May 10, 1869, the two lines met. Two Irish workers laid one last pair of rails from the east. Two Chinese workers laid one last rail from the west. Leland Stanford of the Central Pacific arrived from California on a train pulled by the locomotive Jupiter, bringing with him a golden spike. With locomotives from the two companies facing each other, the company presidents shook hands. A telegraph wire was connected to the rail where the golden spike was to be driven. Governor of California, Leland Stanford, swung at the spike, but missed. Not to worry. The telegraph operator tapped the key, simulating the blow of the hammer, then typed out a one-word message. Done. The golden spike was then pulled up and sent back to California and currently resides in a trophy cabinet at Stanford University. I think it's alongside the trombone spiked by the Cal player that scored the winning touchdown on the 1983 Big Play. I may be wrong. Being at Promontory Point and seeing these two companies come together, you can see how different the two companies operated. This is a replica
of the Union Pacific Locomotive 119. It's the locomotive facing left in the famous photograph. If you notice the black smoke belching from its smokestack, this is a replica of the Central Pacific's Jupiter locomotive, the locomotive facing from the right in the famous photograph. Notice the smoke belching from its smokestack. Why is the 119 blowing black smoke and Jupiter blowing white smoke? It's the fuel to which the two sides had access. The Union Pacific, building from the Midwest, had access to coal. Coal burns much hotter, much longer, so it's the perfect fuel for firing a boiler. There is no coal in California. Central Pacific locomotives were fueled by wood, which certainly doesn't burn as hot or as long as coal, but it was certainly abundant in the 19th century Sierra Nevada mountains. Another thing California didn't have in 1863 was factories. Certainly none that could build railroad locomotives. Therefore, the Central Pacific had to purchase its locomotives, then send them from the East Coast to the West Coast. By the way, before the Panama Canal, that's a voyage that was on ship around South America, almost to Antarctica.
A science teacher I just ran into showed me this interesting fact here. This is not one of the original ties. It's been placed here by the National Historical Society. But take a look at this tie here. This tie is hand cut. It is from trees that the Union Pacific simply had to pick up along the way. There was no way for them to get ties from back east or somewhere else, so they just simply found a tree along the way, cut it up, sliced it up into railroad ties. Take a look at this tie over here. This is a tie from the Central Pacific. The Central Pacific, working out of the Sierra Nevada mountains, they had mills all over the place. So it was simple for them to cut a tree down and cut it up into such perfect proportions. This one's perfectly square. This one's obviously been hand cut. Fascinating stuff going on. And obviously, this is the place where the two sides met.
One thing that's always struck me about this place, Promontory Point, is, why here? Did Congress think that a major city would appear along this route? Because, boy, were they wrong. I wonder what the directors of the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific were thinking. You know what is here? Well, Box Elder County has authorized the creation of a landfill here. A dump. Now that's history gone wrong. 60 miles south here, though, is Salt Lake City.
A major population center. The headquarters of a worldwide religious movement. The state capital. A major research university. A member of the Pac-10, the Conference of Champions. The 2002 Winter Olympics. And an NBA franchise, the Utah Jazz. One of the worst monikers in the NBA. What's that? MLS? Oh, that's kind of like a homes for sale listing, right? Oh, soccer? Okay. The actual East High from High School Musical. It's not in Albuquerque. YOU has to ASK. What would have been their ROI if the UP had built through the SLC?
Why would the directors of the CP and the UP ignore that ROI? My hypothesis was that the same anti-Mormon sentiment that drove the Latter-day Saints from the east into this valley drove the good Christian investors in the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific Railroad to avoid Salt Lake City. But was the route through Brigham City that much less expensive than building through Salt Lake City and then south of the Great Salt Lake? The answer has little to do with an anti-Mormon bias. It's about water. These are steam-driven locomotives. They are driven by intense heat and incredible amounts of water. If the loco ran out of coal or wood, the engine would simply cool and the train would slow to a stop. But if the loco ran out of water, but the fuel was still firing, the boiler usually would explode, killing the fireman and the engineer. You had to have water along the route. It's also about those barriers over there, the Wasatch Mountains. Directly east of here, the highest peaks of the Wasatch rise to 12,000 feet. But there are passes through them. Brigham Young negotiated with the UP to build the line through Weber Canyon and north of the lake. Why not through Big Mountain Pass, the route used by the First Latter-day Saints to reach the Great Salt Lake? Better yet, why not Parley's Canyon, relatively wide and straight, and westward coming to the salt flats of Nevada? It all starts with geography. Cars and trucks can climb the 6% grade up Big Mountain Pass, which is currently Interstate 84, or at Parley's Canyon, the current Interstate 80. More importantly, they can safely descend the 6% grade. But trains are not cars. The heavy trains, laden with 20 or 30 cars behind them, cannot easily climb the 6% grade, using more fuel. More importantly, they couldn't descend the grade safely and stop at the bottom. Because Weber Canyon was lower in elevation and required only a 2% grade, the UP built through Weber Canyon. A spur line was then built from Brigham City to access Salt Lake City. And Salt Lake City was connected to the main line going east and west. In 1869, they had no other choice.
So on May 10, 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed right here at Promontory Point. A trip that used to take 9 months by wagon, or a trip that required a boat to go around dang near Antarctica, now took only 10 days, from East Coast to West Coast. It's kind of like Sammy Hagar in reverse. What used to take 2 hours now takes all day. Well, now what took all day could be done in 2 hours. You'll figure that one out. Hey, I'm glad you came along. Thanks for coming by on our field trip. If you learned something, like and subscribe. Comment if you will, please. I want to thank my friend Dave McDonald for his idea to come out here. I want to thank Mr. Brett Allen for letting us use his equipment. I also want to thank my daughter Molly for being behind the camera for most of this trip. I'm Mark Haggard. I'm a history teacher gone rogue, and this has been Field Trip. Back on the bus.